Hello, welcome to Context, where we examine key regional and global developments. And I'm Orkhan Amashov here to ask some pertinent questions. Turkiye and Iran, two major regional powers bridging Europe, Asia and the Middle East, share a long, complex relationship shaped by geography, history and more than anything else, ambition. Their ties today are marked by trade and cautious dialogue. Although these two countries collaborate on border security, counterterrorism and many other areas, fundamentally speaking, they are also two old rivals competing in different parts of the world, including the South Caucasus, where their relationship is very complex and also contingent upon their respective attitudes towards Azerbaijani-Armenian dynamics. Ankara and Baku are strategic treaty allies, with this being formalized by virtue of the Shusha Declaration, signed in June 2021 and ratified by both countries in 2022. Turkiye is widely regarded as being genuinely interested in the Azerbaijani-Armenian peace process and peace deal eventually, which should also ultimately give rise to what is known as a Turkish-Armenian normalization. On the other hand, Iran and Armenia are two countries that have traditionally been very close to each other, with this bilateral affinity having assumed a more palpable, perhaps even more geostrategic significance for both countries, subsequent to Armenia being defeated during the Second Karabakh War in 2020, the results of which saw Azerbaijan eventually resume control over its Karabakh region. Iran has also been very supportive of Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's Crossroads of Peace initiative, which appears to be, in many respects, at loggerheads with Azerbaijan's Zengezur corridor project, strongly supported by Turkey, by the way, aimed at connecting Azerbaijan's mainland with its Nakhchivan exclave, potentially, but not necessarily, sidelining Iran from a key geopolitical artery. This overland passage traversing southern Armenia promises to reshape Eurasian trade routes. For Baku and Ankara, it appears to be a matter of restoring regional connectivity with wider geopolitical implications. For Tehran, however, it presents a challenge to long-standing influence and territorial access. Since the corridor is to provide for Azerbaijan an unhindered access to its Nakhchivan exclave, Armenia has some concerns over sovereignty and some other related matters. Well, there are so many vital elements in this tapestry of points of alignment and conflicts of interest to discuss. And joining me today to discuss this very interesting element are Fariz Ismailzadeh, member of the Azerbaijani Parliament, politician, scholar, vice rector of ADA, and Mr. Ragip Soylu, Turkiye Bureau Chief at Middle East Eye. Well, welcome to both of you, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Thanks for having us.
My first question is effectively the self-same question I'm addressing to both of you. Perhaps, Mr. Soylu, we can begin with you. What is the place of this region, South Caucasus, in the pecking order of major geographies wherein Turkey and Iran are competing with each other?
I mean, as you mentioned, Turkey and Iran's relationship is extremely complex and century-old relationship, and both countries are heavyweights in the region. And they have some sort of red lines they basically respect on each other when it comes to competition and to some extent rivalry in the region. And I think one of those lines of competition have been recently extremely, overwhelming for Turkey, because if you remember, 2 or 3 weeks ago, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan basically made some comments which really angered Tehran over Iran's influence in Syria as well. But as you suggested, in the geopolitical context, Iran and Turkey occupy a central role in the middle corridor specifically, and they also occupy a location basically interconnect with Russia, with the South Caucasus, with the Asia, with the Middle East. It basically is an important and dynamic geolocation that a lot of superpowers and also regional powers have vested interest in. But I can say, to begin with, is that the Turkey and Iran tensions are not new, and they're not going to disappear in a day, and they will be long-standing, because by nature these two states have dramatic interest in the region, and those interests basically push them to compete.
Dr. Ismailzadeh, these two countries, Iran and Turkey, they are, of course, have been described as occasional allies and enduring rivals. How does their relationship look like to you in the context of Azerbaijan?
Well, certainly in the South Caucasus, there are many moments when they are competing with each other. We know that over the past 30 years, Turkey-Azerbaijani relationships have deepened a lot, including energy projects, transportation projects, cooperation on economic and military sectors. And it is not a coincidence that Azerbaijan has received significant support from Turkey for the development of its economy as well as for the liberation of its territories. I would say that Iranian-Armenian relationships have also developed a lot. So that has been a cause of tensions with official Baku. And there are moments when Azerbaijan is looking at Iran and Turkey as inclusive partnership, inviting both of them. For example, the format of 3+3, where Azerbaijan has proposed both Turkey and Iran and Russia to be actively involved with regional security, regional cooperation, inclusive format of cooperation. Also, Azerbaijan has focused a lot on bilateral relationship with Iran, transportation networks, linkages across the border. But overall, I would say that if we look at the last 10 years, I would say that Turkey's role has grown a lot. Turkey has become extremely powerful, let's say, player in South Caucasus as well as in Central Asia. And that has at times been at the cost of Iranian influence in the region.
Mr. Soylu, Dr. Ismailzadeh mentioned about strong relationship, intimate relationship between Armenia and Iran. In March 2025, literally now, when there is a great deal of speculation over Iran's own fate, so to speak, with Trump administration's foreign policy choices sending shockwaves across the globe, how would you define Armenia's importance for Iran? Because for Iran, under mounting sanctions, Armenia has played and could still play as a role of a conduit politically and economically in terms of providing access to Western leading spaces. How would you evaluate the importance of Armenia for Iran in this wider scheme?
I think there are two pinked approach over here. For first of all, the geography. Of course, it's very important for Iran to retain its control or access to Armenia to basically connect itself to the northern horizon. I mean, to Russia and the other, northern countries as well in the South Caucasus. And of course, there are other ties in terms of trade, in terms of some energy deals as well. But secondly, Armenia has strong influence, strong lobbying power in the United States, in France, in Canada. And Iran remaining friends with Armenia that basically enable Tehran to use those power centers in these Western capitals to basically defend its interests. So that's why it's an important relationship. And Iran, that's why wants to maintain this equilibrium in the region. It's extremely concerned about the Zangezur corridor, as you mentioned, because it wants to maintain this access and ties to Armenia. And through Armenia, we know that Iran also maintains its access to Russia. And as you remember, in the last couple of years, there have been significant developments in between both countries due to Ukraine war. I mean, Iranians, transferred technology, expertise to Russia to use basically Shahadet drones to be used against the Ukrainian state. And the Ukraine one is basically through Azerbaijan in some ways. But it's vital for Iran to maintain that access to Russia through Armenia.
Dr. Ismailzadeh, we talked about equilibrium and Iran being interested in this equilibrium. Effectively, we talked about Iran-Armenia relations driven by the factor of necessity, because Armenia needs Iran and Iran needs Armenia. So the reciprocity is key there. An Iranian foreign minister recently stated, Abbas Araghchi recently congratulated both countries, Azerbaijan and Armenia, on the conclusion of the negotiations on the draft peace agreement, urging both sides to sign the deal as soon as humanly possible. Because bearing in mind that Iran has benefited from Armenia's isolation, which is related to the current circumstance involving Azerbaijan-Armenian dynamics, also the lack of Turkish-Armenian normalization. Why should Iran be legitimately, for rational reasons, be interested in the signing of the deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia?
Well, generally, South Caucasus has been through very turbulent times. We have seen occupation of Azerbaijani lands. We have seen frozen conflicts and closed borders. So of course, a region which is unstable, region full of conflicts, is not good for Iran. So I think that normalization of Armenian-Azerbaijan relationship in some ways would be also good for Iran, because they can be regional integration, regional cooperation, opening of the borders, more inclusive, let's say, regional development, and there would be less risks for foreign interference. What we see now is we see a new arms race in the region. We see countries like India, France, and others entering the arms race in the region. So I think at some point Iran also might consider this as a risk for its national borders. But one point I want to specifically make is that Iran should be concerned about deepening relationship, military relationship between Armenia and the West. Traditionally, Armenia has been Russia's military ally, but in the last 3 years, what we see is that Armenia is deepening its cooperation with NATO countries, specifically with France, with United States, Greece. So I think that Iranian government is concerned about that. There has been some let's say concerns about the reorientation of the Armenia's foreign policy. So I think in the long term, this kind of emphasis on cooperation between West and Armenia will pose some security risks for Iran as well, and Iran might reconsider its attitude towards official Yerevan.
Mr. Soylu, how important is it for Turkey to see this deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia, this peace agreement? It's officially known as Agreement on the Peace and the Establishment of Interstate Relations, signed very, very quickly. We understand there is an element related to Turkish-Armenian normalization. Perhaps you could reflect on both those elements.
It is very crucial for Turkey to have this deal, have this deal go through. It's important to many reasons. I mean, first of all, if this deal goes through, as you suggested, Turkish-Armenian normalization will basically be completed, and both countries would establish their embassies, establish their diplomatic relations, the trade blockage over Armenia would end, the borders will be open. There will be every sort of relationship that you can imagine between two countries would happen between Turkey and Armenia. And Armenian leadership in recent years, especially after the Second Karabakh War, they basically, even though they lost the war, they began to see the importance of a good relationship with Turkey. And they've been basically trying to carry this relationship in Ankara. I mean, you can see, for example, the Armenian leadership attending Antalya Diplomacy Forum in the recent years, and I'm sure they will come also this year as well, later next month. And it's very important. But it's important in the other sense as well. If Armenia and Azerbaijan can basically end their differences, and then they can have the Zangezur corridor, and something, maybe not Zangezur corridor, maybe Aras corridor, that is also Azerbaijan is also trying. It will be very important for Turkey's plan to establish this middle corridor and basically expediting the goods coming from China or Central Asia to Europe or vice versa. And Turkey sees this corridor as extremely important, Zangezur corridor, because it will connect Turkey to Central Asian Turkic countries, including Azerbaijan and others, and sees it an important bridge to basically unify all those countries coming together, creating an economic power that would basically deepen the Turkic footprint in the region.
Dr. Ismailzadeh, ultimately, as we understand, Ankara-Tehran relations are incredibly complex, and in many ways this relationship is not fixed in hostility or alliance. And I suppose this ability to cooperate while contesting influence reflects a broader pattern based on the reality that rivalry is quite often tempered by necessity and by strategic realism. In this context, you earlier mentioned about 3+3 format. I would like you to reflect on the future of the 3+3 format. To what extent do you think the current geopolitical configuration is conducive for that format to be properly implemented, with Tehran and Ankara actually more cooperating than competing with each other?
Well, the format 3+3 was very popular at the end of Second Karabakh War, because Azerbaijan really wanted to send a message that the region has a brighter future, and this future can be inclusive of all the regional powers, including Iran and Turkey and Russia, So that vision was very popular 4 years ago, and still Azerbaijan in its foreign policy, aligns very much towards pragmatic and mutually beneficial cooperation with all of its neighbors. So relationship with its big neighbors is of priority for Azerbaijan. But currently, I would say that there are some geopolitical tensions. Since 3+3 has been proposed, what we have seen is first we have seen the war in Middle East and significant, let's say, pressure on Iran. Later on, we have seen events in Syria where Iran has lost significant, let's say, influence. And now what we see is also a lot of pressure coming from new US administration, Trump administration, even some threats towards Iran. So I would say that at the moment, 3+3 maybe not so much on the agenda because we need to wait and see what happens with the Middle East developments. Let's say, what has happened in Gaza and subsequent wars in Syria, it has really affected Iran's foreign policy, its capabilities. On the other hand, I would say that what we see is rising influence of the Turkic world, Turkic Union. There is more and more integration between the Turkic states, more and more regional development, especially with the focus on Middle Corridor. So I would say that instead of 3+3, now Azerbaijan putting its bets on the Turkic world and Turkic family. And I believe that Turkic family, let's say, Organization of Turkic States, has a big potential in economic and military cooperation in the region.
Mr. Soylu, Azerbaijan's Turkic identity is very clear. Very recently, a year ago, I think in early 2024, Azerbaijani president said Azerbaijan has got only one family, that's the Turkic family, the Organization of Turkic States. And Azerbaijan is currently playing a very interesting role, or is planning to play a very important role in terms of Abraham Accords as well, in terms of bringing Turkiye and Israel together. Quite a number of analysts are talking about prospective proactive role to be played by Azerbaijan in that particular respect. What does that role, do you think, mean for Turkey-Iran rivalry or cooperation?
You mean a possible Azerbaijan role to broker some sort of reconciliation between Turkey and Israel?
Yes, indeed, something along those lines, to play a constructive role to make sure those two powers in the Middle East also cooperate. Yes, exactly.
I think Azerbaijan can play an important role. I think it already played a few years ago when Turkey has been trying to patch up things with Israel. I remember President Aliyev basically, publicly saying, even actually after a question that I asked by myself years ago, that, he wanted to see his both friends to come together, because that's what Turks do, right? I mean, they bring their friends together and basically they pitch their issues. But the problem is with the current Israeli administration is not Israel itself as a state, but more of the Benjamin Netanyahu's government. And I think Turkey has been making very clear in recent months that, especially as you can see it in the Turkish Foreign Ministry statement just 2 days ago, specifically highlighting that, this issue about Benjamin Netanyahu and his government rather than the state of Israel. And once there is a change within the Netanyahu government, and there will be a new government in place, I'm very sure Azerbaijan can play a very constructive role to bring both sides together and basically create this modus vivendi. But the second issue over here is, which we can see some role for Baku, is Syria, because as you can see, the current Netanyahu government has been extremely vocal about the Turkish military presence in Syria. It has been basically issuing threats. Netanyahu has been leaking stuff on media, basically saying that we don't want to come against, or we don't want to have a conflict with Turkey in Syria. But in order to basically the conflict, in order to basically prevent this kind of tensions going up in this region, the Azerbaijan can play a role to basically maybe deliver some back channel talks or relay messages or establish some sort of mechanism to basically stop these, emerging tensions in Syria as well.
Dr. Ismailzadeh, some analysts, in particular after, of course, 2020, talk about Azerbaijan as a medium power, as a middle power, as a power which is punching above its weight, in particular after 2023 September, of course. Where do you see Azerbaijan when it comes to Israeli-Turkish dynamics? And can Azerbaijan play a positive, constructive role? And what will be the impact of this Azerbaijani involvement for the wider Iran-Turkiye sort of rivalry or cooperation? I know it's a very big question, probably requires a long answer, but I would be most grateful if you could provide a concise answer. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that definitely Azerbaijan is a bridge between Turkey and Central Asia. Without Azerbaijan, Turkey would not be geographically and symbolically connected to Central Asia. Also, in many ways, Azerbaijan is a bridge between Turkey and Russia because Azerbaijan has equally good relationship with both countries. And I remember when there were some issues between Turkey and Russia with the shooting down of the Russian plane. Azerbaijan has helped to mediate between President Erdogan and President Putin. So I think this kind of approach can be applied to Turkish-Israel relationship as well. I think that Azerbaijan, having excellent relationship with both countries, at some point can serve as a bridge maker between Ankara and official Israeli government. But I think that also this puts a lot of pressure on Azerbaijan because on issues which concern the Islamic world, Azerbaijan, of course, wants to keep solidarity with Islamic world, but at the same time, Azerbaijan is one of the few countries which has a really good level of cooperation with Israel. And nowadays, there's a lot of talk between trilateral cooperation between Azerbaijan, Israel, and United States, new Trump administration. So I think there's a big potential for that, big potential for mediation. And Azerbaijan, keeping good dialogue with Ankara, will explore these opportunities.
Well, Dr. Faris Ismailzadeh, MP, and Mr. Ragip Soylu, I'm most grateful to both of you. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This for Faris Ismailzadeh, member of the Azerbaijani Parliament, politician, Vice Rector of Ada University, and Ragip Soylu, Turkiye Bureau Chief at Middle East Eye. Well, as mentioned earlier at the beginning of this interview, during my introduction, the relationship between Tehran and Ankara, these relations are very complex, they are not simple, and there are strong elements of cooperation in relation to counter-terrorism and many other elements, but fundamentally, in many ways, these two nations, they remain rivals, and the elements of rivalry can easily be felt in this region, in the South Caucasus as well. But of course, the fields for cooperation are still there. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and see you very soon indeed.